Buddhism for Today, The Essential Wisdom of the Threefold Lotus Sutra by Nikkyo Niwano. Part 2, The Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wondrous Dharma. Chapter 20, The Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect. We cannot assume that all of Shakyamuni Buddha's disciples, who listened to his exposition in Chapter 19, understood the real meaning of the encouragement and cautions included therein. Some of them must have become discouraged, worrying that people like them could not possibly put all the teachings of the Lotus Sutra perfectly into practice. Others may have taken a nonchalant attitude, thinking they would be able to obtain some merit one way or another by just making a show of carrying out the 5 practices of Dharma teachers. Still others may have reacted with arrogance, flattering themselves that, unlike Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, the practitioners of the 2 vehicles, they, the Bodhisattvas, could obtain these kinds of transcendent powers and were in a class by themselves. Shakyamuni Buddha's expositions of his Dharma were always completely thorough and never lacking, and whenever he perceived even the slightest doubt on the part of his disciples, he always reached out to them with ample instruction to lead them to perfect understanding. We can easily imagine that he did the same in this case. Shakyamuni Buddha suddenly adopts a more serious tone, and addressing the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Great Power Attained, he begins to speak as follows. Everyone, now is the time that you must fully understand the implications of what I have taught you. Anyone who insults or abuses monks, nuns, laymen, or laywomen who have faith in the teachings of the Lotus Sutra and put them into practice, or anyone who slanders them by accusing them of a list of faults, will incur the heavy consequences of their own wrongdoing, as I have explained previously. Conversely, the merits received by people who practice the Lotus Sutra are so vast and boundless that they purify their 6 sense faculties, as I have just described in the previous chapter. I will now share one example from the past to illustrate both of these points. The story of Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect. The Buddha then launches into the story of the Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect, which I paraphrase as follows. Great power attained. In the infinite past, there was a Buddha named King Majestic Voice. His era was called Without Decline, and his land was called Great Accomplishment. And in that land, King Majestic Voice expounded the Dharma for all living beings. To those who sought to become Shravakas, he gave the teaching of the 4 Noble Truths, which was appropriate for their goal. This teaching awakened them to the truth that frees one from being emotionally captive to the ups and downs of life and leads to the nirvana of liberation from one's suffering. To those who sought to become Pratyeka Buddhas, he gave the teachings of the 12 causes and conditions, which was suitable for their aspiration. For the multitude of bodhisattvas, he taught the 6 paramitas as the path to attain highest awakening, the wisdom of the Buddha. Even after the Buddha King Majestic Voice passed away, the age of his true Dharma was extraordinarily long. The age of the true Dharma is the time during which the truth the Buddha has expounded is practiced as taught. The age of the imprint of that Buddha's Dharma was many times longer. The age of the imprint of the Dharma is the time in which the truth that a Buddha taught is not yet lost, but its practice has declined and become a mere formality. After the ages of his true Dharma and the imprint of the Dharma had ended, the time came when the truth that Buddha had taught was about to disappear from the world. But then another Buddha, named King Majestic Voice, appeared in the world to teach the truth. In this way, 20,000 million Buddhas, all named King Majestic Voice, appeared one after the other, ensuring that the Dharma always remained in the world. It was the time after the first King Majestic Voice had passed away, and the world had entered the age of the imprint of the Dharma. Most of the members of the Sangha were arrogant monks who studied the teachings only academically, or those who practiced the precepts in form only, without focusing on their deeper significance, and feigned enlightenment. In those days, there was a person who cultivated the practices of bodhisattvas, and his name was the Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect. Shakyamuni Buddha then asks the Bodhisattva Great Power Attained, Great Power Attained, why do you think he came to be called Never Unworthy of Respect? The Buddha himself then gives the reason, saying, this is why. Whenever he came across people, whether they were monastics or lay persons, he would face them, make a deep bow of respect, and say to them, I deeply respect you. I could never find you unworthy of respect for any reason, because you are all practicing the Bodhisattva way, and are certain to become Buddhas. Instead of concentrating on reading and reciting the sutras, this monk, never unworthy of respect, practiced by always approaching whomever he saw, making a deep bow of respect toward them, and uttering the following phrase as if it were the only single thing he could remember. I could never find you unworthy of respect, because you are all certain to become Buddhas. Among the Sangha, there were those who were infuriated on hearing those words, because their hearts had been sullied by anger. They hurled horrible insults at him. You stupid idiot of a monk. Where in the world did you come from? We don't care whether you respect us or disrespect us, and we don't want to hear your ridiculous assurances that we will become Buddhas. Over the course of many years, Never Unworthy of Respect was continually showered with insults like these, but the Bodhisattva never became angry, always repeating to whomever he met, "You are certain to become a Buddha." The crowds of people who failed to understand the real meaning of those words took them as an insult, and exploding in anger, they hit him with their staffs and battered him with anything they could pick up and throw at him, such as stones and shards of pottery. Whenever this happened, the Bodhisattva would escape, running far away from them. Yet from a safe distance he would call out in a loud voice, "No matter what, I could never find any of you unworthy of respect, because all of you are certain to become Buddhas." It was because he always repeated the same phrase that all the arrogant monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen mockingly gave him the nickname, Never Unworthy of Respect. The years steadily passed, and this Never Unworthy of Respect came to the end of his days. Suddenly, within the serene mind with which he faced death, he spontaneously attained his own powerful realization of the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, expounded by the Buddha King Majestic Voice in the earlier age. Due to the merits of having upheld those teachings over the course of his life, he purified his six sense faculties, which I have just finished explaining to you. These merits prolonged his nearly exhausted lifespan for an additional 200,000 million myriads of years, and during that entire time, he explained the teachings of the Lotus Sutra for people far and wide. The monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen who had ridiculed the Bodhisattva by giving him the name Never Unworthy of Respect discovered that he had obtained great transcendent powers to help people remove their delusions. They also learned that through his skillfulness in explaining the Dharma, known as the joy and power of eloquent discourse, he had obtained the ability to gain the trust of anyone he desired to help. In addition, they found that he also attained the capacity to preserve his good virtues by never becoming agitated by anything, which is known as the power of great goodness and tranquility. After seeing that Never Unworthy of Respect had obtained these abilities, they became willing to listen to his teachings, and once those people heard the Bodhisattva speak with such joy and power of eloquence, they accepted his words completely, and they all became followers of his teachings. In addition to those people who had ridiculed him, Never Unworthy of Respect helped countless other people transform themselves through his teachings, leading them on the path of seeking supreme perfect awakening. After that lifetime came to an end, he met a tremendous number of Buddhas, 2,000 million in all, every one of them named Light of the Sun and the Moon. Under the guidance of all these Buddhas named Light of the Sun and the Moon, Never Unworthy of Respect again instructed people in the teachings of the Dharma Flower Sutra, and for this reason he was able to encounter another 2,000 million Buddhas, all named Light of the Free and Unhindered Clouds King. Under this multitude of Buddhas, he received and embraced, read and recited the teachings of this sutra, and taught it to people. As a consequence of these practices, he further purified his six sense faculties, the ordinary human eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and thanks to this attainment, he was able to teach the Dharma to people without any apprehension or uncertainty. Great power attained, the Bodhisattva, Never Unworthy of Respect, paid homage to the number of Buddhas that I have just described, deeply revering and praising them, and having planted roots of goodness by accumulating practice, he obtained virtues approximating those of a Buddha. Still, he continued to undertake bodhisattva practices without ever falling into arrogance, and afterward he again encountered many Buddhas, and again taught the Dharma under their guidance. Finally, having perfected his merits, he was able to become a Buddha. Great power attained. Let me ask you, could that Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect of that time have been anyone other than me? If in my previous lifetimes I had not received and embraced, read, recited, and taught this Dharma Flower Sutra for the benefit of others, I could never have proceeded directly to supreme perfect awakening. Great power attained. Because those monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen responded to me with hearts of anger, disrespecting and mocking me, they brought on themselves the consequences of their own mindsets. In absence of any opportunities to encounter a Buddha, hear a Buddha's teachings, or meet people with faith in a Buddha's teachings, all for a period of 200 million kalpas. They never had any chance to find liberation from their many sufferings, and they endured lives of great agony in Avicii hell for 1,000 kalpas. When the consequences of the wrongs of their past had finally run their course, all those people encountered the Bodhisattva never unworthy of respect once again, so that they could turn in the direction of supreme perfect awakening by transforming themselves through the teachings of never unworthy of respect. Great power attained, let me ask you, could the four groups of that time, the monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen, who looked down on the Bodhisattva never unworthy of respect, have been anyone other than Bhadrapala and the 500 Bodhisattvas, Lion Moon and the 500 nuns, and Thinking of Buddha and the 500 laymen? These people today who, thanks to the teachings of the Buddhas, are so determined to attain supreme perfect awakening that they will never turn back, were in a previous lifetime the ones who ridiculed and mocked the Bodhisattva never unworthy of respect. Great power attained. Now is the time that you must fully understand the implications of what I have taught you. This Dharma Flower Sutra can bring great merits to all Bodhisattvas, and gradually lead them upward from the Bodhisattva realm, and bring them the wisdom of a Buddha. And this is why all of you Bodhisattvas and great Bodhisattvas must continually apply yourselves to receiving and embracing, reading, reciting, teaching, and copying this sutra. After Shakyamuni Buddha finishes this story, he concludes the chapter by restating its main points in verse. Having studied the Threefold Lotus Sutra thus far, readers may notice that the style of this chapter, the Bodhisattva never unworthy of respect, differs considerably from all the previous chapters. The panoramas of the literary landscape portrayed in the chapters to this point have presented beautiful, dreamlike domains that are quite unlike anything we would ever encounter in this world, or conversely, truly dreadful scenes of frightening, hellish realms. Most of the characters that appeared in previous chapters have been superhuman, highly idealized figures, including, of course, the Buddhas. This chapter, in contrast, is replete with familiar scenes and a cast of characters brimming with truly human traits and qualities. Although this chapter gives us no detailed descriptions of any particular place, the story itself brings to mind scenes of everyday life in a corner of any average town today. The characters that appear in this chapter evoke images of common, ordinary people we might see anywhere. The words monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen do not necessarily indicate only monastics and practitioners of Buddhism, but include all the types of people we might come across in the center of any run-of-the-mill town. A soldier home on leave, young roughnecks loitering around the town, shrewd middle-aged shopkeepers, good-natured but strong-willed restaurant owners and hotel managers. Mingling among these people, we can also picture swaggering scholar monks boasting of their own complete mastery of Buddhism and its doctrines, smug middle-aged monastics proud of their strict observances of the precepts, and elderly monks who have come to town to beg for alms, standing aloof on street corners without ever preaching even a single sermon for almsgivers. The protagonist of this chapter, the Bodhisattva never unworthy of respect, brings to mind the image of a young monk we come across in the neighborhood who looks serious, yet slightly peculiar, but also strikes us as having something dignified about him. While it's safe to say that the entire Lotus Sutra possesses a highly refined literary style, Chapter 20 feels closest to a modern short story or novella. Its deeply human qualities make for a narrative that also feels easily accessible to us. This is as it should be, because this chapter vividly depicts how one ordinary, unremarkable person attains true faith and eventually becomes a Buddha, the perfection of his character, by practicing the single virtue of revering the Buddha nature of others. Up to this point, Shakyamuni Buddha has repeatedly taught people to devote themselves to the 5 practices of Dharma teachers, and in the previous chapter, he explained the sweeping, unlimited merit of doing so. On hearing this instruction, however, There will be ordinary people whose lack of self-confidence reasserts itself, causing them to believe there is no way they could fully carry out the 5 practices of Dharma teachers. There will be others who are quick to pander to the Buddha by pledging to carry out the practices of Dharma teachers, thinking they can get by with just making a show of undertaking the 5 practices for appearance's sake. Unfortunately, these are the limits of the hearts and minds of ordinary people. The 3 important lessons of the story. Shakyamuni Buddha was able to perceive these kinds of feelings and apprehensions within the minds of the people listening to his teachings, so we can surmise why, in this chapter, he completely changes his method of teaching the Dharma. The Buddha seeks to reaffirm 3 important lessons by including them in this story of his former lifetime. The first is a lesson that completely devoting oneself to even just a single virtuous practice is truly noble. It is the first step towards liberation. The second lesson is that no matter how extensively we study the Buddha's teachings in purely formal terms, or how much we might focus on the external forms of Buddhist spiritual discipline alone, it will be of little value. Shakyamuni Buddha teaches us that our rich and meaningful life is found in persevering in sincere practice, even if we focus on only a single spiritual discipline. Third, the fundamental practice of the Bodhisattva is to revere the Buddha nature of others, which means recognizing and affirming the Buddha nature of all human beings. If we try to help others attain liberation without recognizing and affirming their Buddha nature, our efforts are likely to be hollow and formalistic. Truly assisting people's liberation lies in recognizing and affirming their Buddha nature through the spiritual discipline of revealing their Buddha nature to them by revering it. Shakyamuni Buddha demonstrates these 3 important lessons in the story of this entirely down-to-earth person, Bodhisattva never unworthy of respect. What's more, he also tells us that this thoroughly human personality is none other than himself in a former life. With this revelation, Shakyamuni Buddha, previously a remote figure, suddenly seems so close to us that we cannot help feeling a true connection with him. At the same time, we gain a strong awareness that as a practical matter, we too can definitely attain the perfection of our own character by following the path trodden by the Bodhisattva never unworthy of respect. Until this chapter, Shakyamuni Buddha seemed so far removed from us that it was as if he existed somewhere above the clouds. But by showing us this portrait of the deeply endearing and fully human figure of himself in a former life, Shakyamuni Buddha makes us feel as if we have discovered a ladder to that place beyond the clouds where Buddhahood awaits, and this gives us tremendous encouragement. We are able to summon renewed courage. There is nothing impossible about Bodhisattva practice, and all we have to do is begin by emulating never unworthy of respect. In this sense, this chapter holds a special place in the applicational section of the Lotus Sutra, and in fact, in the Lotus Sutra as a whole. The story of the Bodhisattva never unworthy of respect includes many other important teachings, and we will explore them one by one in the remainder of this chapter. Revering people to bring their Buddha nature to light. The monk never unworthy of respect appears in the world during the age of what is called the imprint of the Dharma. This is a time when the true teachings of the Buddha remain in the world, but are studied and carried out as mere formalities. Thus, there is no longer any awakening. In this period, Buddhist clerics master the teachings of the Buddha in a superficial and merely formalistic fashion, but fancy themselves to be eminent monks. Some of them keep only the precepts, leading lives of religious devotion, out of touch with the rest of the world. The remainder are second- and third-rate imitators of the first 2 types. The imprint of the Dharma is an age in which Buddhist practitioners have lost sight of the true vitality of Buddhism. What is Buddhism's true vitality? It is none other than realizing with all one's heart the truth of the axiom, all living beings possess Buddha nature. This is a starting point for every aspect of our faith and practice. Becoming aware of one's own Buddha nature, bringing it to light, cultivating it, and developing its dynamism are the first steps of our lives of faith and devotion. These actions correspond to the stage of Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha practice. If one has Buddha nature, it stands to reason that others must possess it as well. Thus, if one can thoroughly realize their own Buddha nature, they will naturally recognize that other people possess it equally. Anyone who is incapable of recognizing the Buddha nature of others has not yet fully awakened to their own Buddha nature. Just by surveying our surroundings, we see that there are many who, honestly speaking, are not very good people. No matter how we look at it, we can't help thinking that some of them are just evil. We cannot find any room in our hearts to sympathize with those who kill, rob, or repeatedly cheat others out of their fortunes. But thinking this way is like making a judgment about a person's worth based solely on the bare facts of their crimes, as they might appear in media reports. If we tried acquainting ourselves with the entirety of their lives, we would realize that there is no one, no matter how bad, who is completely bereft of humanity. A murderer might, after returning home, hold their children in their arms and bounce them on their knees. A person who treats people with incomparable cruelty may overwhelm their pet with affection. The leader of a criminal gang who brings law-abiding citizens to grief might feel as affectionate toward their favorite underling as they would toward their younger brother. This is not to say we should arbitrarily excuse their crimes or romanticize them as if they were some kind of movie anti-hero. But when we observe such ostensibly evil people closely, not with indulgent pity, but with calm and dispassionate eyes, we cannot avoid recognizing the trace of humanity within their hearts, in the moments when they play with their children, treat their pets with affection, or hold their favorite gang members as dear as family members. This trace of humanity is a seed of their Buddha nature. We are catching a glimpse of this mere single spark of Buddha nature that glows even within hearts stained and deeply encrusted with the defilements of bad karma. It is like a ray of light escaping through a narrow window in a dark wall. Everyone, without exception, has such an opening in their minds that allows others to see the spark of their Buddha nature. When you look at others, discover their goodness, the glimmer of light escaping from that single narrow window into their hearts. Praise it. By doing so, you make them aware of their own light. A person who has taken notice of the glimmer of light within themselves will of their own accord open that window wider, because they will want to make the light within their hearts ever brighter by letting in more and more sunlight from outside. This is the act of revering people to bring their Buddha nature to light, and at the very same time, it is a process of the other persons becoming aware of their own Buddha nature. Revealing other people's Buddha nature is the greatest and most important focus of Bodhisattva practice, wherein we discover a living and vibrant Buddhism. We should not miss this point when reading the sutra's words. That monk did not apply himself to reading and reciting the sutras. This statement, that never unworthy of respect practiced nothing but reverence for others, while yet not devoting himself to reading and reciting the sutras, does not mean there is absolutely no need to read and recite the sutras. Shakyamuni Buddha's intention in this passage is to emphasize that reciting the sutra as a mere formality is of no value to us, and that in the age of the imprint of the Dharma, revealing others' Buddha nature by revering it is of greater importance. It is the fundamental practice of Buddhist spiritual discipline that comes before anything else. The Bodhisattva, never unworthy of respect, revered everyone he met, telling them, "I deeply revere you, and could never find you unworthy of respect, because you are certain to become a Buddha," which is none other than revealing others' Buddha nature by revering it. His saying, "You are certain to become a Buddha," is a very act of recognizing and affirming people's essential quality, Buddha nature, revering and praising it. Direct transformation and indirect transformation. There are two ways of encouraging people to discover their own Buddha nature. The first is to recognize and affirm their good qualities. Then, the person, having taken notice of them, can naturally eliminate the unwholesome and negative in their lives by nurturing their good qualities. This is the direct, straightforward method of helping transform a person by drawing out their fundamental quality, Buddha nature, and as such it is called direct transformation. This is an example of the Buddha appearing through his own deeds, as explained in chapter 16. The second method is a reverse approach, pointing out the unwholesome and negative in people's lives, which encourages them to uncover the hidden good that is within them by removing the unwholesome and negative. This is called indirect transformation, because one helps them become aware of their Buddha nature by prodding them in the opposite direction, confronting them with constructive critique. This method corresponds to the Buddha appearing through the deeds of someone else, as also explained in chapter 16. These two methods are like two sides of the same coin, and work in tandem with each other. Ideally, each is used when the situation calls for it, but direct transformation is more effective in most cases, because, as the word suggests, This method follows the natural workings of human psychology. Generally speaking, nobody takes offense at being praised. When people feel good about themselves, they will naturally throw wide the window into their hearts so that more warm light shines in. And when they do so, their Buddha nature becomes animated. In pre-war Japan, children were educated through the frequent use of scolding, a severe style of indirect transformation. But nowadays, this has changed to education through encouragement and praise, a method of direct transformation. People came to understand that praise is more effective than punishment for developing a child's character and drawing out their unique talents. The flip side, however, has been the rise of a tendency to raise children indulgently because of an exclusive reliance on a pedagogy of direct transformation. It is also sometimes necessary for children to improve themselves by experiencing indirect transformation. Be that as it may, everyone is pleased with being praised, although adults who have lost their original innocence and grown skeptical tend at first to feel uncomfortable when praised, repulsed at the suspicion that they are being buttered up with flattery. Such misunderstandings are eventually dispelled, however, if the person praising them is speaking sincerely from the heart. Genuine praise will gradually widen that narrow window into their hearts and mind, however tightly it may be shut. The same may be said of those who are revered by the Bodhisattva never unworthy of respect. Among them were some who became angry at his words, assuming he was poking fun at them, and so they hurled insults, threw rocks, and threatened never unworthy of respect with staffs. But the Bodhisattva continued demonstrating respect and repeating his words of praise as he had always done, without ever becoming angry at the violence directed toward him. This sincerity gradually softened the hearts of those who scorned him. The fact that the people of that day gave him the nickname never unworthy of respect is proof of their growing esteem. People generally don't come up with a nickname for someone unless they find something endearing about them. At first, the arrogant people who mocked never unworthy of respect thought the Bodhisattva was making fun of people by revering them, or that he was some meddlesome troublemaker. But eventually, even those who were truly angry at him gradually came to see him in a different light, because, when hit with rocks and struck with rods and staffs, he simply continued as before, revering their Buddha nature by making an expression of respect and praising them, saying, "I could never find you unworthy of respect." Gradually, they began to think of him as just some peculiar monk, and as he grew fondly familiar, becoming something akin to a local institution, they started to become vaguely aware of something admirable about him. The perseverance of never unworthy of respect finally caused people to hold him in awe within their hearts. The importance of persevering. The Bodhisattva never unworthy of respect teaches us something very important through the example of his actions. When people persevere at something, even an act as peculiar as placing one's palms together and revering everyone they see, repeating it as if it were the only thing they knew how to do, and if they practice it wholeheartedly no matter the resistance, then in the end, their conduct cannot fail to move others. People will be unable to feel anything but admiration for that person in their hearts. This is how people came to hold the Bodhisattva never unworthy of respect in awe. After the Bodhisattva realized the teachings of the Lotus Sutra and began to explain it to other people, they accepted the teaching, and believing it, all of them became his followers. A famous example of perseverance is the Japanese Buddhist monk Zenkai, who single-handedly dug a 185-meter tunnel through a rocky mountain at the Yabukai Gorge in Kyushu, Japan, so that local villagers could cross the gorge safely. When he began in the project, he could not obtain any cooperation from the villagers, and at times he even faced various forms of resistance. But Zenkai brushed it all off and threw himself into the task. The sight of him grappling with the mountain eventually made a profound impression on the villagers. There are many instances in which people who built new roads, opened up land for cultivation, or dug irrigation canals for the benefit of the people around them and the wider society, have gone through the same kinds of experience as Zenkai. Their examples teach the valuable lesson of what tremendous results can come from performing even a single virtuous deed that one knows is right, pouring one's heart into it, and seeing it through to the finish with an indomitable perseverance in the face of all obstacles, sparing neither our bodies nor our lives. The next especially important passage of the chapter is the following direct quotation from the sutra. Whenever the Bodhisattva, never unworthy of respect, said this, people struck him with staves and sticks, or pelted him with shards and stones. Even while escaping to a distance, he would still loudly exclaim, "I could never find you unworthy of respect, as all of you will become Buddhas." We can learn 2 lessons from these 2 sentences. The first is the fact that never unworthy of respect escaped to a safe distance when people directed violence at him. Note that the plot does not go something like, never unworthy of respect never flinched even when beaten so severely with rods and staffs that his arms were broken, or when his forehead was cut open by a stone. There are people who would no doubt find such an alternate version more appealing, however, and this may stem from a misunderstanding of the famed words, begrudging neither body nor life, and spare neither our bodies nor our lives, that appear in the sutra. If we truly understand the words, spare neither our bodies nor our lives, we will know that it means we ought to devote ourselves to the Dharma above all else. When we make the Dharma our priority, our primary concern becomes upholding the Dharma, developing it, and spreading it by every possible means. If we are devoted to the Dharma above all else, the petty idea that we should be ashamed of fleeing danger will vanish from our minds. If we are determined to live as long as possible, so that we can persevere in teaching the Dharma as extensively as we can, we will flee immediately when we find ourselves in danger. In recent years, we have seen a marked trend toward pursuing political and economic struggles through recourse to violence. The tone of demonstrations and strikes has taken a turn for the worse. I think these developments stem from a lack of flexibility within the hearts of people on both sides. The willow tree bends with the wind without breaking, even though it looks fragile, whereas the oak tree snaps like a twig in a storm, despite its apparent sturdiness. Isn't suppleness of mind the most important requisite for any people to become a truly great nation? I believe that a real understanding of Buddhism is the quickest, best way for this to be achieved. Buddhism emphatically teaches flexibility of the heart and mind. Hence, true practitioners of Buddhism will all develop it without exception. The life of the Bodhisattva, never unworthy of respect, provides an ideal model of those who live their lives in such a way. Holding fast to one's faith. Another important lesson is that, although the Bodhisattva, never unworthy of respect, fled to avoid physical oppression, he remained absolutely steadfast in his faith, never abandoning the true Dharma. Herein lies the difference between weakness and flexibility. Spiritually weak people easily compromise their beliefs or disregard their faith when subjected to even the slightest outside pressure. But people of true faith stick to their convictions, no matter what may happen, holding fast to the true Dharma. The purpose of having a flexible mind is none other than upholding the true Dharma without ever wavering. At no time did the Bodhisattva, never unworthy of respect, cease the Bodhisattva practice of revealing others' Buddha nature through reverence, despite having to flee when physically threatened. In the end, he succeeded in causing the seeds of Buddha nature to sprout within the hearts of all the people he met. It is people like the Bodhisattva whom we should consider truly brave. The Bodhisattva, never unworthy of respect, attained a highly refined state of spiritual awakening through the single practice of revering others' Buddha nature. At the end of his life, when he was about to die, the sutra tells us that he distinctly heard, coming from thin air, the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, as they had been taught by the Buddha King Majestic Voice. The sutra's phrase, coming from thin air, means hearing the Buddha's teachings echoing in one's own mind. In other words, the Bodhisattva realized the truth on his own. Saying that never unworthy of respect realized the truth on his own may sound mysterious, but it is not really the slightest bit mystical, because universal truth is something that can naturally be discovered by anyone. Universal truth, by definition, must have existed since time immemorial, if it is really the truth. It also stands to reason that in the past, there must have been outstanding people who discovered universal truth on their own. In this chapter, the Buddha King Majestic Voice realized the truth and taught it to others, but that was ages before. And by the time the Bodhisattva, never unworthy of respect, lived, that Buddha's teachings no longer remained in the world in their original form. But because universal truth is timeless and indestructible, when an outstanding person appears in the world, they will be capable of rediscovering the forgotten truth. The Bodhisattva, never unworthy of respect, is one such individual. In our age, in which we possess writing and other advanced forms of communication, capable of preserving knowledge. Some people might think this story about knowledge of the truth disappearing from the world sounds absurd, but such an opinion is narrow-minded. Since the beginning of the universe, something like the intelligent culture that human beings have achieved must have appeared and disappeared more times than we can imagine. If a nuclear war should occur, for instance, our present civilization would be destroyed, along with everything else on Earth. A new and different form of life might eventually appear, perhaps after hundreds of thousands, or even hundreds of millions of years, and in time that new form of life would develop its own civilization. When we consider the story here in this chapter, from the standpoint of the infinite history of the universe, it is hardly far-fetched to think that myriads of Buddhas called King Majestic Voice taught universal truth throughout the distant past, or even that the Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect realized a universal truth on his own when he was nearing death. The cycle of practice for oneself and others. How did the Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect live out the prolonged lifespan afforded by the merits of upholding the teachings? Herein lies another great lesson. Never Unworthy of Respect realized the teachings of the Lotus Sutra on his own, and because he wholeheartedly believed and devoted himself to the teachings, his lifetime was extended. During the immense span of 200,000 million myriads of years, he taught the Lotus Sutra to people everywhere. Not only did Never Unworthy of Respect undertake the basic bodhisattva practice of revering the Buddha nature of others, but he also taught the Buddha Dharma in depth, thus advancing several stages on the path of bodhisattva practice. By teaching the people who had once arrogantly ridiculed and abused him, he helped every single one of them awaken. His story does not end there. Because of the merits of teaching and transforming those people, the Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect met, paid homage to, revered, and extolled another 2,000 million Buddhas, and under their guidance he taught the Lotus Sutra. Through the merits of that practice, he met another 2,000 million Buddhas, and likewise taught the Lotus Sutra under their guidance, and because of these merits, he therefore attained clarity and purity in all of his sense faculties, that is, his ordinary eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Without fear or hesitation, he expounded the Dharma among the four groups. Because of the many roots of goodness he planted, he again met myriads of Buddhas, received their instruction, and once more taught the Lotus Sutra. The merits of this practice enabled him to meet an additional multitude of Buddhas, obtain their teachings, and so on. Continuing in this fashion, Never Unworthy of Respect alternated innumerable times between practicing to transform himself and practicing to help others transform themselves, becoming a Buddha through the accumulation of limitless merits. Herein we discover the greatness of the Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect's life of spiritual faith and devotion, the courageous spirit of perseverance through which he completely fulfilled his original vow without ever regressing. His courage was not reckless and rough, but thorough and tenacious. He faithfully traveled the way to becoming a Buddha by carrying out what he had learned, and then learning from what he had carried out, alternating between practice to transform himself and practice to transform others. We should follow Never Unworthy of Respect's path, retracing his footprints step by step. It is perfectly acceptable to begin the journey by performing a single bodhisattva practice, since all the Buddha's teachings share one basis. If we proceed to carry out that one practice with sincerity, we will definitely be able to realize all the truths that originate from the single basis of all teachings. We do not keep those realizations to ourselves, but share them with others, and by doing so, we not only give them the chance to gain merit themselves, but also come to an increasingly greater understanding of those truths ourselves. This is what it means to meet countless Buddhas one after another. Every time we meet another one of these successive Buddhas, which is a way of saying each new teaching we encounter, we pay homage to the teaching, revere it, extol it, and explain it to others. Teaching our realization to others becomes the catalyst for encountering more Buddhas, that is, teachings, and every time we repeat this process, we move steadily closer to the mind of a Buddha, step by step. Shakyamuni Buddha himself bears witness to this process with the example of his own experience, which he reveals when he tells the Bodhisattvas that he was actually never unworthy of respect in a former lifetime. By revealing this, he affirms that the Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect's way of life is the direct path to becoming a Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha's revelation at the conclusion of the story of the Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect cannot fail to afford great encouragement to those who have become discouraged with living a life of faith. As mentioned in the beginning of this chapter, people may say to themselves, "How can I possibly teach the Dharma to others when I still haven't fully understood it myself?" But they would be greatly emboldened with a newfound confidence if only they understood the fundamental principle of spiritual life. All we have to do is explain the teachings just as we ourselves have heard them. The more we share them with others, the deeper our understanding will become, and thus we will steadily progress step by step along the path toward perfection of our character by patiently repeating the process of learning and teaching. An active approach to sharing the Dharma. At this point, we should recall an important passage that appears at the beginning of the chapter. Even when the Bodhisattva, never unworthy of respect, saw one of the four groups in the distance, he would make a point of going up to them in order to bow respectfully and praise them. The words, "saw one of the four groups," and "make a point of going up to them," constitute the heart of the matter. These words are important because this is the spirit in which we can share the Dharma with others. We must not adopt the passive approach of teaching the Dharma only to those who ask us to, or only to people we are closely related to. On the contrary, we should have such a positive attitude that we take the initiative, actively reaching out to others and making a point of sharing the Dharma with them, even those who are distant from us in geographical or social terms. This is the attitude of a bodhisattva who truly desires to help liberate people from their suffering. The Bodhisattva, never unworthy of respect, was not afraid to carry out such bodhisattva practice. Initially, he was disliked by some people as a nuisance, and his persistence provoked others to anger, but his unfeigning sincerity eventually touched their hearts. We have much to learn from Never Unworthy of Respect's active approach to sharing the Dharma. The reality of karmic retribution. It is essential that we also read with care the following passage quoted from the sutra. Great power attained, because the four groups of monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen of that era had angry minds and mocked and belittled me. They could never encounter a Buddha, never hear a teaching of the Dharma, and never see a Sangha for 200 million kalpas. They underwent great torment and anguish in Avicii hell for 1,000 kalpas. This passage clearly illustrates retribution from a Buddhist perspective and allows us to gain a good understanding of what it actually is. It does not state that retribution is a divine punishment inflicted on anyone by a god or Buddha. It tells us that, since people harbor anger against or despise a bodhisattva who carries out the noble practice of revealing people's Buddha nature, they become unable to encounter a Buddha, hear the Dharma, or happen upon any Sangha members, people who have faith in the Buddha Dharma, for a period of 200 million kalpas. This retribution is not inflicted by anybody. These people never encounter a Buddha because they themselves have slammed shut the window into their own hearts, and they never hear the Dharma because they themselves have covered their own ears. For this reason, they are unable to extinguish the raging flames of defilement within their minds, and for the span of 1,000 kalpas, they experience human suffering akin to agony in Avicii hell. This is the reality of retribution. The Buddha always seeks to liberate people through his boundless compassion and never imposes punishment on anyone. It is people themselves who are unwilling to see the Buddha or meet those who convey his teachings. The Buddha never forcibly liberates people, but waits calmly until the right moment, when their ability to receive the teaching has matured, the point at which the karma of those actions is extinguished. However evil people's actions may have been, if they experience great suffering for a long period of time in recompense, such suffering will remove their karma. The windows into their hearts will definitely open up once again the moment that karma disappears, because those who have experienced human suffering for a long period of time begin to experience an intense longing for true liberation, and yearn for something absolute on which to rely. In short, their Buddha nature begins to open its eyes. This awakening is shown by the words, "When their recompense was complete, they again encountered the Bodhisattva never unworthy of respect, teaching and transforming living beings and turning them toward supreme perfect awakening." Those who come in contact with the teaching will surely attain liberation from their suffering someday. The significance of connecting with the Dharma. In a previous lifetime, the arrogant people we read about in this chapter were repeatedly told of the reality of their Buddha nature by the Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect. Because they did not readily accept it, however, they went on experiencing lives of suffering and distress for a long period of time. After this battering of suffering and distress, the light of the teaching they had once been taught, that all beings possess Buddha nature, was rekindled within their hearts, and as a result, they were finally able to embark on the way toward liberation from suffering. But if these people had never been told of the existence of their Buddha nature by the Bodhisattva Never Unworthy of Respect, what would have become of them? They would not have been able to escape life's suffering. For this reason, no matter what kind of person someone may be, we must never forget that revering their Buddha nature and showing its reality to them provides great merits that will someday lead to their liberation from suffering. This is the most important teaching of the chapter. In the verse that concludes this chapter, Shakyamuni Buddha restates the teachings he has just explained. This is another cherished section of verse that encapsulates the teachings within a short passage, so we should learn to recite it by memory if possible. Readers will automatically understand these lines of verse if they have firmly grasped the meaning of the preceding prose, so I will point out a few distinctive phrases that appear. He was leader of all means that the Buddha King Majestic Voice guided all living beings. The phrases, four groups of that era, were attached to their own views of the teachings, mean that monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen were preoccupied with intellectual study of the Dharma, which is to say, they had neglected its spirit and had become caught up in observing nothing but formalities. Readers should have no problem appreciating the remainder of the verse.